Thanks for having me out. I'll be your entertainment for this afternoon, apparently. As Ken mentioned, the subject of my presentation is on the Beast of Boggy Creek, as I call it, which is, of course, the influence for the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek. So I guess I'll start out by asking how many of you have actually seen the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek? Raise their hand. Yeah, we got one guy said he saw it on his first date, and that caused the girl to jump in his lap. I said, well, the movie was apparently working for you, man. But this movie, it was released in 1972, and whatever memories you have of it, or if you've never seen it, the movie may be rather cheesy by today's standards, but this movie was highly influential to many cryptozoologists today. Some of the prominent researchers and authors, Loren Coleman, for example, who have been researching unexplained phenomenon and Bigfoot-type creatures, cite this movie as a huge influence on what they do. And that's the case when you talk to many people, specifically, you know, a lot of times in the Bigfoot research areas, but, you know, anybody who's interested in unexplained things.
They paid a lot of money for a low-budget production, I understand.
That's true, yeah, and we'll get into that here. And that's one of the fascinating things, because not only do you have the history of the creature, which is a local phenomenon because it's just up across the border in Arkansas, but how the movie was made, and that just was interesting unto itself, how it was done in the early 70s, and as well the social phenomenon of what happened to the little town of Fouke, Arkansas, once, you know, now they have this famous legend associated with their little town. So just a little bit of back history about myself. I became interested in the subjects of cryptids and UFOs and ghosts and the whole thing ever since I was young. I loved horror movies and monsters, and you know, I read all the old books, Strange But True, and here's a couple of cool old book covers. And I've spent a lot of time as a musician over the years, but I've also done writing, and I write for a magazine called Rue Morgue, which is a horror magazine you can buy down at Barnes and Nobles and stuff. And they kind of found out that I was into cryptozoology, so they kind of assigned me the task to cover you know, any kind of cryptozoology and related to horror culture. And there's a lot of cheesy Bigfoot movies out there to cover. So. And of course, you know, one of the influences on me was the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek. My parents had some crazy notion of taking me to the drive-in. I must have been very young. I can remember seeing it. So I grew up hunting with my father. He's an avid bow hunter, and so I had traveled around Texas, and we camped in Arkansas, and I was familiar with all these little rural towns. And so when I saw a movie that had that kind of backwoods feel, the local feel. Now, this wasn't a Bigfoot that, you know, a big, friendly, fuzzy, well-fed Bigfoot of the Pacific Northwest. This was something that was like that potentially lived right here in our own backyard. So it just captured my imagination as a kid and really never let go.
What year did you see it? Do you have any idea?
I'm guessing that it had to be probably 76.
I think I saw it in 78. Somebody back here saw it in 78.
Yeah, it may have been as late as that.
I saw it in a drive-in theater.
Right.
By that time, it didn't make the
Yeah, it had a lot of life early on in the theaters, and then drive-ins were so popular in the 70s. This was kind of the perfect, you know, movie. It was scary, made girls scream. They made them jump in your lap.
I
you know.
jump in my lap.
Yeah.
Asked me to shut up.
So, you know, it was a perfect drive-in, yeah, it was a perfect drive-in movie. So it had a life for many years in the 70s, which helped to fuel the fire and the notability of this, and gave the opportunity for many people to see it over the years. So I was young, and you know, I was there in the 70s. So as it turns out, as I said, I was writing for Rue Morgue magazine, and I thought I was looking for subjects to write about within the cryptozoology and, you know, film area, and I thought, man, you know, I always loved that movie, The Legend of Boggy Creek, and the tagline was a true story. So I thought, you know, what was really true about that? You know, I've loved this movie for years, but I never knew the whole backstory. And so I started researching this. I was starting on the internet. I looked around, and, you know, there was scatterings of newspaper reports and this and that, and you know, I thought, well, certainly somebody's got written a book on this thing. You know, everybody loves the movie, and I found that nobody had written a book. I couldn't believe it. You know, I thought, man, this is a perfect opportunity. You know, it's a subject I like, and as I looked into it, there was a lot more to the story than just an article. In fact, it was so fascinating that it would easily fill a book. So I set out, you know, to seriously research it and hurry up before you know, Nick Redfern decided he was going to write this book. I'm typing it up. I mean, I was like, man, I got to hurry. This is so cool. I don't want somebody to come out with this book. Okay, so as I said, this strange word is pronounced Fouke. Fouke, Arkansas is located in Miller County, which is southwest Arkansas. It's part of the Texarkana metropolitan area, so it's really right there on the border of Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana, as you see. So it, you know, it all intents and purposes belongs to our region and what we consider a local phenomenon. The population in Fouke is only 800 people today, with maybe 1,000 living in the outlying areas. Back in the 70s, when the movie came out, the population was only 500 people in this little town. The area where Fouke is located, right up here, it's really kind of got a bay window on this expanse of bottomlands and remote habitat. Boggy Creek runs across the town like this, across Highway 71, which is by Fouke, and that feeds into Days Creek, which eventually runs into the Sulphur River, and the Sulphur River runs from Texas and then on south. It's a long and kind of a swampy river. All this is adjacent to the Sulphur River Wildlife Management Area, which is almost 20,000 acres of hardwood bottomland. It's one of the largest bottomland hardwood habitats remaining on the Red River Valley, which is important to our story, obviously, because, you know, for this creature to actually exist, it must have, you know, a suitable habitat. But as it turns out, you put all this together, it's really a perfect place to hide an unknown animal. And here's a really cool photo by one of my friends to show you the Sulphur River area. All this is just no one lives out there. This is just part of the Sulphur River Wildlife Management Area, and that's Mercer Bayou and some of the riverways weaving through there like a serpent through those trees. So, you know, you just look out on that. It is just a lot of area. Okay, so the story really starts what I call the media age. That was in May of 1971, and what we're looking at here is the actual house where some really strange incidents occurred there in May, and some folks by the name of Ford moved into this rent house, which was a little bit outside of Fouke, and as the weeks went on, they lived there a few weeks, they reported hearing, you know, some strange animal that had been creeping around on the porch. Night after night, they heard strange things, and at one point, they even saw this hairy hand come through one of the open windows. And so, you know, this really frightened the families that were living there. They had no idea what this was, and this eventually culminated on one Saturday night in which the creature was getting a little braver, and it was coming up on the porch, and they ended up borrowing a shotgun from the landlord and deciding they're going to confront this because they were scared. The women are scared, and so they go out and they had flashlights and they tried to get a visual on what this thing was, and they described it as being 7 foot tall, covered in hair, standing upright, and they ended up taking some shots at this thing. They're just so frightened about these incidents, and as this occurred, it just sort of climaxed into this just frenzy of fear, and one of the gentlemen, Bobby Ford, decided he had enough, and he ran back towards the house here, and as he did, he got up towards these steps and he's heading up to the porch, and allegedly, and what he believes is he was attacked by the creature or one of these creatures. He was entangled with it, was scratched up, ended up almost jumping through the front door, and as this happened, the family was just scared to death, and he was basically in shock. So they took him down to the Texarkana Hospital and checked him in, and he was treated for minor injuries and shock. And he was truly in shock. The doctors there was no doubt about that. And so, of course, you got a guy down here that says he was attacked by a hairy monster. The doctor gets on the phone and calls one of the reporters and says, man, this guy, I don't know what happened, but something very strange happened down in Fouke. You should go check it out. And they told him to go down and check out the Ford house. So the next day, the reporters went down there and they looked around. They saw evidence of strange tracks, and of course, they didn't find any creature. They found no blood. And so that ended up getting reported in the paper. And back then it just said, like, Fouke family attacked by hairy monster. Just matter of fact. And, the public reads this in the Texarkana Gazette, and, it just grabbed hold of people right then and there from the beginning. And so, you had people coming down trying to look at the house, and quite an exciting period at that time. So it wasn't about 3 weeks later that the Fouke Monster is seen again, and that's when the reporter gave it the name the Fouke Monster, and associated it forever with the town of Fouke at that point, whether they liked it or not, basically. And so in this case, a well-respected couple that lived in Texarkana was traveling north on Highway 71 from Shreveport towards Texarkana, and that takes you right through Fouke. And they claimed to see this hairy ape or monkey-like creature run across the road near Boggy Creek. And so that really got people's attention, because the Fords had only lived there a few weeks, but the Woods family that reported this was well respected, and they definitely were not somebody to be making up stuff. So this fueled the fire, and then again on June 3rd, some people reported seeing this creature as well. Now on June 13th, a gentleman, farmer, went out to his freshly plowed bean field and discovered a trackway that went about 150 yards out of the woods, across the bean field, and disappeared into the woods again. And these tracks measured about 13.5 inches by 4.5, and they were very strange, and they had 3 toes as far as they could tell. There was another vague indentation of another digit, but it was a very peculiar track. And this is a shot of Virgil Roberts, who later became the mayor of Fouke, holding a casting that the townsfolk made of this. So now you've got, here's the actual newspaper report. So you just keep getting these things in the Texarkana Gazette, and it is just freaking people out down there. Now you got people coming down there trying to hunt the thing, wanting to get a glimpse of it. It was starting to cause a ruckus in Fouke. So, now you've got this creature, and they said, wow, what is this? And people thought, oh, well, this all began in 1971. Well, that wasn't true. The old-timers said, hey, wait a minute. This isn't the first time we've had reports of a creature like this down here. People are like, really? And so, the newspapers have been covering the stories that were happening currently, but as they were covering those, the old-timers started bringing forth all these other sightings that people had in a place called Jonesville. And Jonesville is located about 5 miles southwest of Fouke, And Jonesville, I mean, it is not a ville, it is just people's houses out in the woods. I mean, these people are a very rural area, almost a creepy place. I mean, the trees are growing over, the roads are dirt. They only paved these roads back in the 90s. That's how rural it is. And so they started bringing forth a lot of reports. In 1946, the county sheriff, Leslie Greer, said that a woman had told him that from her porch she saw this strange, hairy, man-like creature moving off in the brush. She had no idea what it was, and she just simply told him the story. And, you know, he really didn't tell a lot of people, but as the newspapers were wanting information, you know, he said, well, you know, this lady told me this. In 1955, Willie Smith claimed to have shot at the creature. He saw it several times prowling around his home, and he lived right down here, right off Boggy Creek. And so he was actually the first guy that kind of theorized that the creature traveled the creeks, and that's kind of will tie in later to the movie. In 1964, there was a really spooky sighting. A girl by the name of Mary Beth Searcy lived in this Jonesville area, and I've been to the actual house. It's the only one still standing that was one of the originals that was actually used in the movie, and where this girl had seen this. But out of her window, lurking back in the forest one evening, she saw, again, what she described as a 7-foot tall, hairy, man-like creature. And when I did my book research, I really wanted to talk to her because she had a really important sighting, a really scary sighting, and she wouldn't talk to me, but I found a report that the Shreveport News had done back 20 years ago, and they had interviewed her. And when you see her on film, and she says, you know, they say, well, you know, how do you know this thing's real? She says, I saw it. I'm telling you, I saw it. And you can just see it in her eyes. It's just it really kind of ties in the stories that all these people were telling. So in 1965, another woman was hunting down there, and she's a very experienced hunter, and she was hunting kind of on a cut pipeline. If you've ever been out in the woods, you know, these are thick. You can barely walk at some point, so when they install these pipelines, they have to cut a clear cut through there so they, you know, the engineers can move back and forth. So she was kind of hunting on that because animals will use that to move back and forth. And as she was sitting up in her tree stand, said she saw what she thought was a man running towards her. She said maybe a black guy or whatever, running, getting closer. And as he got closer, said, no, that's not a man. It's somebody covered in fur, dark fur. And she said the thing, you know, moved closer and never really saw her. She's out hunting, of course, and ran by her. And this scared her to death. And actually, she didn't tell this story for years. Nobody, it was never in the paper. It wasn't highlighted in the movie, and only during my research did I even discover some of these where they had never told anybody before. So I was able to get a lot of these sightings that had never before been published. In 1965, a kid by the name of Lynn Crabtree, and the Crabtrees kind of play into this whole story if you've seen The Legend of Boggy Creek. Hey, Travis Crabtree, all that. Lynn Crabtree, here's a good illustration from my book of this. He was out squirrel hunting one morning, or late one evening, I'm sorry, and he had kind of dozed off, and he hears some ruckus, and some of the neighbors' horses, which kind of ran free, were running from something. It ran out into their lake, and so he gets up to see what the trouble was, and as he did, he realized there's something standing there, and it was within like 30 feet of him. And so, you know, you realize this is what frightened the horses. And so as he stood there, a thing started coming towards him, and he described it as almost man-like, a hairy man-like creature with a dark face and a flat nose, maybe 7 feet tall. So here you got a 14-year-old kid. I mean, I can only imagine seeing something like this, if in fact he did, coming towards him. So he ended up just taking 3 shots at the thing, dropping and running back towards the house. And when he did, the family was there, and they had visitors, and the kid came in such a fuss, and they had heard the gunshots, of course. What's the matter? And, well, you know, here's what I saw. And his father, Smoky Crabtree, took in the story, and they went out to investigate and to see what happened, to see what they could find. They couldn't find any evidence of the creature, unfortunately, but this brought the Crabtree family into it, and Lynn's father, Smoky, was a very experienced hunter, and that kind of cemented his relationship to the legend of Boggy Creek from there on, which would resurface in the movie. And then the final sighting, which I think is very important to this whole Jonesville thing, because we're talking about people who live in a close-knit community. You know, they all know each other, say they're hallucinating or whatever you might want to say as an explanation as a skeptic. You got to really reassess that when you talk about 1967 when Carl Finch. Has anybody ever heard of a band called Brave Combo? Very popular band, Grammy Award winning. Well, back then the leader of Brave Combo, Carl, was playing a battle of the bands down in Shreveport, and he lived in Texarkana. So after that event was over, he had to drive up Highway 71 at 3 a.m. in the morning and head back to Texarkana. And as he drove, he was with his cousin, and they said